I'm gonna go over real quickly just the difference between the craft and the classic Stampin' Up! Pads. And basically you can take this information and apply it to other ink pads. So what we have here is a Stampin' Up! Craft ink. The craft Stampin' Up! Ink is a pigment ink. And this is the Stampin' Up! Classic ink pad, and this is a dye ink. So what's the difference between the two? If you take a look at the craft ink is almost like a milkshake. So the craft ink is a milkshake and the paper is like a sponge. If you pour milkshake over a sponge, it's not gonna immediately absorb into the sponge. It kind of sits on top of the sponge for a while. So that's exactly what the craft ink does. It just kind of sits on top of the paper. So I'm actually gonna stamp on the white first and show you what it looks like on the white, and then I'm gonna stamp it on the brown and show you what it looks like. So because it doesn't immediately soak up into the paper, it shows up a little better on the dark ink or dark papers, and you can emboss with them. Okay, so this is almost the same color. This is real red, but so here it is on the white, and then I will show you what it is on the brown. You see, it doesn't really show up well because the dye-based ink pad is almost like your juices, your water. If you pour that juice or water over your sponge, it's just going to immediately soak into the sponge. So that's what it does. It just immediately soaks up into the paper, and it dries immediately, and it doesn't show as deep of a color as versus the pigment ink does. Okay, so for more pigment inks, this is Colorbox chalk ink, some Brilliance, and Color Versacolor. Now these are going to be different pigment inks that, yes, you can use with embossing. What embossing entails is you lay on the color, and you want that color to sit on top of the paper as pigments do. That way it stays wet long enough so that when you pour the embossing powder on it, the embossing powder will stick to that pigment ink because it's raised. It takes a little longer to dry, and those are qualities that you're looking for so that you can emboss. So it'll usually say pigment ink, pigment ink. Anytime you see chalk ink, those are pigment inks. Mark, gold standard for any stamper. You must have Versamark. It is very, very broad in what it can do. It is a beautiful, beautiful watermark ink. So I'll show you. So what it does is it's like tone on tone stamping. It just deepens the shade of cardstock that you're stamping on. You might not be able to see it that good, but it really adds a subtle background, and these are excellent for embossing. In fact, I use them all the time for embossing. I use them in conjunction with dye ink because this Versamark is sticky, sticky, sticky. And so you stamp your Versamark first, and then you stamp your dye-based ink, and it leaves the impression sticky enough to grab embossing powder. I'll go over that in my embossing tutorial. But anyway, back to the Versamark. It's just a must. It's a staple for any stamper, and you will be very pleased. It maybe about $5–6. Yeah, it's a little expensive, but you will have this in your arsenal for the lifetime of your stamping career. StazOn is a solvent ink. So this is another category of inks. These solvent inks are good for stamping on non-porous surfaces. A non-porous surface would be transparency, your acrylic, your glass, any of those kind of things that are glossy. The StazOn adheres to the glossy surfaces, and it is non-water soluble, so you can definitely use your aqua painter with the StazOn ink. And one note about this, you see this cover? You must keep this cover. It prevents it from drying out. Before they had this little do not discard on here, because this is more of a recent warning, so to speak. But I threw away all of these on my other ink pads. So there's about 15 stays on ink pads that don't have this in my cabinet, and they are drying out. So you need to keep this. So I'll just show you quickly how you can stamp on transparency right here. The impression wasn't that good, but you get the idea. So it doesn't bead up, and that's why they call it a solvent ink. Now, one thing about StazOn is you cannot use it with your Copics. It kind of, I want to say melts, but it mixes with the solvent ink, so it pulls the black out. So the Copics and StazOn, not so good together. Distress ink is a dye ink. What it was designed to do, Tim Holtz designed this, what it's designed to do is alter photographs. So you can use a sponge and, you know, swipe it over your photograph, it ages it, and it stays wet, and that's what it's designed to do, stay wet long enough so you can manipulate the color, pull some away, add more. So it's very good on photos, directly onto photos. It's also good for distressing the sides of paper. I usually just grab the ink and directly pad to paper, start doing this, and it distresses the corners and the sides. You can't see it very well on this paper, but I have another paper right here. So what I usually do is I just kind of go like this and distress the sides like that. Classic Stampin' Up! Ink pad. This is basic brown. Basic brown, basic gray, basic black. These are all dye inks that are made to use with watercolors and your aqua painter. So they are compatible with your watercolors. They are compatible with your Copics. So this is a really good ink pad to have because it works with your watercolors, it works with your Copics. This Palette Ink has come out with a new hybrid ink pad. Hybrid because the color acts like a pigment ink, but it works like a solvent ink, like StazOn. Okay. One thing different about the palette ink is that you can use your Copics, whereas your StazOn you can't use your Copics. You can use Copics with your hybrid inks. You can use your hybrid ink with watercolors and your aqua painter. You can't really emboss with it. I've tried it. You know, you really have to put on the powder really fast, but most of the time it dries too fast. But that's one of the properties that it has, that it's fast drying, so you can use it on non-porous surfaces as well. This one you need to heat set it though with your embossing tool for non-porous surfaces. But it is a good ink pad to have, and I've been using it a lot just because it works so well with the Copics. Beginning stamper, what do I need? I would recommend, of course, your Versamark. That's a must, just because with the Versamark you can transform the dye-based inks into embossing ready inks. So I would definitely recommend the Versamark. Very, very versatile. Probably and I just never noticed, but I think it's called Versamark just because it's versatile. So Stampin' Up! Pad, the basic brown, basic black, or basic gray. I find basic brown is the one that I use time and time again. I've been using a little more black lately, but basic brown is a good color, and you can use your Copics and your watercolor, so it does double duty. And I would also recommend getting these little stamp pads. These are Stampin' Spots that we sell at Stampin' Up! And you can get the whole set of colors for a nominal price. They do also have this type of little ink pads at, you know, most craft stores. I would just recommend these just because you'll find what ink pads that you keep on going to, and then you can probably go and spend a little more money and get the bigger one. But for most stamp colors, these are good enough. But like I said, once you start stamping more, you'll notice, oh, I use the, you know, purely pomegranate a lot, or I use the more mustard a lot. So, you know, you can go and buy the bigger pads, but this is a good way to just, you know, start off.